Okay, so we are going to cover a whole variety of topics here tonight. And Kelly, you can go ahead and click to get the slide filled up there. We're going to cover a couple of areas of state law that apply to elected and appointed officials, including open meeting law, data practices, gift law. And then we're also going to cover some other areas that are covered in city charter and in other policies, including conflicts of interest, meeting procedures, parliamentary procedure, everybody's favorite topic. And then also just go over some kind of practical tips for how to be present on social media. And then at the end, we'll talk a little bit about some of the city code requirements pertaining to commissions and some tips for effective participation in your role as commissioners. And then at the end, we'll have a question and answer period if we have time left. But as I said, I'm happy to take questions too as we go along. So first of all, congratulations, as the mayor said. Welcome to all of you who are new, and for those of you returning, welcome back. You, as commissioners for the city of Richfield, you have a very significant role in policy making for the city. You, as you know, are appointed by the city council, and although as commissioners and appointed officials, you don't ultimately, in most cases, make final decisions, you do give important advice and recommend direction to the city council to better inform the decisions that they are making at their level. And that happens in conjunction with staff. Each commission, as I understand it, has a staff liaison that you work closely with who attends meetings. And in conjunction with staff and your fellow commissioners, your role is to provide advice and give direction to the city council so that they can better set city policy and make decisions that affect the entire community. In essence, you're really serving as ambassadors to the community as well, by the boards that you sit on and the public discussion that you're involved in public meetings. You play a very important role in not only communicating with the city council, but also as serving as ambassadors to the city as a whole. So the first area of law that I want to talk about is the open meeting law. And some of you might already be familiar with this, but this is a state statute that essentially says very broadly that meetings, including city council meetings, board and commission meetings, must all be open to the public. That seems like a pretty basic concept, but I think sometimes we forget about that, and in the private world, corporate world, that's not the case. Boards can sit in private meetings without the public transparency that you all are subject to. So meetings also are required to be within the city limits, and of course, most of your meetings take place at the municipal center, at City Hall, or on other city premises. And in addition to your meetings being open to the public, the agenda materials and any information that comes to you as commissioners, the public must also have access to those agenda materials unless they're otherwise protected or confidential for some reason under the law. So the open meeting law applies to not only the city council, but as I mentioned, to all city boards and all city commissions. And the open meeting law, the statute actually, this has been more defined by the courts. The statute does not really address what is a meeting for purposes of the open meeting law. But the Supreme Court has told us that the open meeting law comes into play when you have a gathering of a quorum or more of the members of any body. So most often, a quorum is defined as a majority of the group. So anytime a majority of your commission meets, that means that the open meeting law is triggered and you must be open to the public. You must allow the public to attend. All of the rules and things that come into play under the open meeting law are applicable when a majority or more of you are meeting. Now, there might be some situations where the open meeting law is not triggered, even though a majority or more of you might be together. For example, if you're in a training or like for tonight, that's not necessarily, although I think this is open to the public. There might be other conferences or seminars where a quorum or more of the body is present. That doesn't mean that the open meeting law, that's a meeting where the public is allowed to attend. The open meeting law also doesn't apply if you have a chance meeting of a majority or more of you at a social gathering or something like that. So it really is where you're gathering for the purpose of receiving or discussing information on official city business. I think the general rule of thumb here and the tip, the best practical tip, I think, is that unless you're at a commission meeting, I think it's best to just avoid having discussions with other commissioners about official city business. And by following that general rule of thumb, you just avoid having any open meeting law issues altogether. So in some cases, the open meeting law does allow for meetings to be closed to the public. This is most often going to be the case with the city council. For the most part, commissions as advisory bodies to the city council are generally unlikely to conduct closed meetings because the topics where closed meetings are allowed are generally not within the authority of city commissions. For example, discussing when there's a lawsuit against the city or when there's some kind of confidential investigation going on. Those are situations where the city council might be allowed to go into a meeting that's closed to the public, but commissions usually don't deal with those kinds of things. So it would be pretty rare that the commission would go into a closed session, but I just wanted to bring that part of the law to your attention. So whoops. Thanks, Kelly. So the open meeting law, there's also some considerations that you have to think about when you are communicating with other commissioners or the public by email and social media. So if you remember, I talked about the open meeting law applying when a majority or more of you is involved in a discussion about city business. Well, the same rule can come into play if a majority or more of the group is talking about city business by email or over social media. And so there is a risk there if you are emailing with other commissioners or messaging on social media and you have communications where ultimately a majority or more of you are involved, that can be an open meeting law issue. And so you have to be careful about that. Now, commissioners and city council and elected officials, it's okay to use social media if you are communicating with the public generally, that's fine. If you are communicating with other commissioners, I think you just need to be thinking about, are you doing that to avoid having a public discussion, or is there some other purpose behind it? I think, again, similar to the last kind of general rule of thumb that I gave you, I think it's best to avoid discussions altogether outside of a public meeting. Save your discussions for those public meetings, and that's, you know, that's why we have them. And again, just avoiding that will eliminate any open meeting law issues. And also, you can ask questions of your staff liaison, who can always consult with me if there's a question about something. And by communicating directly with staff, you're not, there is no open meeting law issue there, because that only comes to play when you're communicating with each other. It's fine to communicate directly with staff, ask questions, and that is totally acceptable and doesn't present any risk.
Did someone have a question?
Yeah, I do. I just want to get a little bit more clarification.
Sure.
I totally understand and get that, you know, if the commissioners get together to discuss stuff and it's higher than a quorum, that does violate. There's a lack of transparency there, and that is totally understandable. My question is that what happens if the commission volunteers, for example, I'm just going to pull an example out of the air, to say that the commission would like to be involved in organizing either the Earth Day or maybe a portion of the Earth Day, an activity in Earth Day, something like that. It's an organizing kind of activity.
Mm-hmm.
How do we go about doing that if we cannot meet? Or can we call a meeting and put it on the web and have it put on the website to saying there's a meeting to organize? I mean, what would be your suggestion on an organizing meeting, not a discussion meeting on policies or etc., but an organizing meeting for an event that that Richfield Council is interested in doing?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. My advice would be, if you know in advance that this is something that you would like to do, just to put it on a meeting agenda and have the discussion at one of your meetings. Essentially, it still is a meeting. It's relating to a city event. So technically, you are talking about something relating to city business and a city event. And so if there is a quorum or more of you involved in that discussion, I think technically it still is a meeting. So depending on how often your commission meets, I would say, if you know in advance, just ask staff to include that on an agenda so that you can talk about it. There's also the option of working with staff to call for a special meeting, and that can be done as well. And then there's certain notice requirements, and it would be posted. And then as long as those requirements are met with posting it and notifying it, which is not burdensome, it's just a matter of getting the notice out there, you can go ahead and then have your meeting.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. So as you all know, over the last couple of years, we've gone through a phase where we've been meeting virtually due to a health pandemic. It seems like things are winding down with that, and meetings will be going back in person, I believe, starting April 1st with the city. So this may be, hopefully this is going to be old news for a while, right, with the virtual meetings. But in the event that we have to revert back to this, I think it's important to cover some of this stuff as well. There are rules in state laws about what virtual meetings have to look like. And generally, members of the body have to be able to hear each other and to be able to hear the public, and the public has to have access to those meetings as well. Something that you all may have experienced as well is that anytime there's a vote taken on a virtual meeting, that has to be done by roll call. And I apologize, I think there's a misspelling in my presentation there. Roll call should be ROLL, I think. Also, some practical tips, and I say this sort of in jest, but not really. Make sure when you're joining a video or virtual meeting that you're doing so from a proper location. Yes, not in Richfield, but in other cities, there have been cases where people have joined a virtual meeting from a hot tub. So don't do that. Don't video into the meeting while you're driving. I mean, use common sense. These are all pretty common sense kinds of rules. It's important to remember that you are still part of an official meeting, so try not to be doing other things while you're participating. Dress and act like you would if you were attending an in-person meeting. I think that's the best advice I can give. So again, hopefully the virtual meetings are going to be in our rear view mirrors very shortly here, but just some good things to remember about that. So we're going to move from the open meeting law topic onto data practices. Data practices is a whole chapter in state law, and essentially it governs any and all information in the possession of the city. It's a very extensive, complicated law, and cities, it's one area where, it's a challenging area because the public has a right to have access to city information. And there's a general presumption under the data practices law that information retained by the city is public and available to the public. There's some exceptions to that, though. The data practices statute generally classifies data under three kind of broad groups. The first is that public, and that is most information that the city has. Some information kept by the city is considered private. Most of the information that falls into that category is some information about city employees. For example, a lot of information about city employees is public, but some of it is considered private, like home addresses, home telephone numbers, that kind of thing. And then there's another category of data that's called confidential. And what that means is that information that's considered confidential is not available to the public, and it's also not available to people who are the subject of that data. The best example of that kind of data is certain law enforcement data where there's an active criminal investigation. I'm just giving you a kind of a high overview here because a lot of this is not always generally applicable to commissions, but it's good information basic information to have. One thing that I think is important for commissioners to know is that government data, so the data practices statute applies to any and all government data. And government data is defined under the law, and it's basically any data in the possession of the city pertaining to city business. I'm paraphrasing, but that's generally what it is. So as commissioners, if you are, for example, emailing about a topic relating to city business, that would be considered government data, and it would be subject to a data request if a member of the public asked for it. The thing about government data is that it doesn't matter where that data is stored. So even if you are, for example, emailing from a private email account or a personal email account, if it's relating to city business, it would be considered government data and therefore subject to a data request if a member of the public asked for it. I don't know, maybe Kelly can answer this question, but I know this is true for city council members, have City of Richfield email accounts. And so anytime they're emailing about city business, they've been given strong recommendation to do that from a city email account. So all of that government data is in one place and easily accessible in the event that there might be a data request. I don't know if commissioners have City of Richfield email accounts or not, but if you don't, I would suggest that if you're emailing or storing information relating to your work as a commissioner, just keep it all in one place. Keep it in a designated folder, for example, or stored on your computer in a designated spot, so that it doesn't get intertwined with your personal information.
Unfortunately, we don't have individual commissioner emails.
Okay.
It is something that we would like to move to at some point, but it is something that we have to work through with IT.
Okay. Thanks for that clarification, Kelly. We can move on to the next slide. So there is some information under the data practices law that is public about appointed officials such as yourselves. That is your name and home address and the other things listed on this slide here. Now, these are items that are designated under the state statute as being public, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the city is collecting all this information about you. In fact, I do not believe that there's a number of these items that the city is not collecting on your application form, for example. I took a look at the city website prior to this presentation, and I know that your names are obviously listed on the commission rosters. I don't know if you were asked for phone or email addresses when you filled out any application forms during the process, but if so, that there is certain information that would be available to the public. So that's just good for you to know. If on the slim chance that you as a commissioner received a data request from a member of the public, I think the best thing to do would just be to contact your staff liaison, and then they will coordinate with the city clerk's office or the designated staff person who is responsible for responding to that data request. Kelly, do you know offhand what information is retained on commissioners that might fall into this category here?
We do ask for phone number, address, and email address when filling out applications. It is not something that we disperse, though.
Okay.
It is something that's available for other commission members, but we don't put that out to the public.
Okay. So it's not on the website. It's not being advertised.
Correct.
But if somebody asked for it, there are certain things that would be available. So the next area I want to talk to you briefly about is the gift law. This is another state law that applies to both elected and appointed officials. And essentially, the law says that local officials, including appointed officials like yourselves, are prohibited from accepting gifts from interested persons. And interested persons under the statute are those persons who have some financial interest in a decision that the official might be making. This is not something that's going to come up very often as a concern for you as commissioners, because you are primarily advisory bodies to the city council, and you are not for the most part, not making final decisions about things. There are some exceptions to that rule, but for the most part, most commissions are advisory bodies. And so you don't have final decision-making power. But it's good to know that gifts are not allowed to be accepted. This does not apply to donations, though. It's very quite common for various groups, individuals to be giving donations to either the city for some designated purpose. And those go through a process where they are approved via a resolution by the city council. So I set one of my colleagues loose on this PowerPoint, and she was getting pretty creative here, so I appreciate that. There are some exceptions to the gift law. I think the main thing to remember is anything significant, anything big, anything that Queen Elizabeth might be able to accept is not allowed for you all. Anything of very insignificant monetary value is permitted. That could be, for example, trinkets, brochures, things that you might pick up at an event that really don't have any significant monetary value. Informational material, like I said, brochures, other things like that. Those things are not covered by the gift law and are perfectly acceptable for you to accept. So kind of similar to the gift law rule, there are some rules relating to conflicts of interest. And this is covered both in state statute and also in the city charter. It's found in chapter 12 of the city charter. In case you want any light bedtime reading, that's where you want to go. These rules apply again to both elected and appointed officials. And this is an area that can get quite complicated legally. It's probably not going to come up very often in your role as commissioners, but it could. The general rule here for you to take away, I think, from this presentation is that if there is a matter that comes before the commission where you have a personal financial interest in it, that is a matter where you should probably abstain from the discussion and or any votes that might be related to that matter. If you think you are in that situation where you might have a personal interest, a personal financial interest, what you should do is notify your staff liaison of that fact if you have a concern. And then the staff liaison will either give you some advice or reach out to me if there are any questions about whether or not you should be participating in any certain matter. So the city council actually has adopted the Sturgis Code of Parliamentary Procedure. I think that each individual commission, and I don't know whether in your bylaws, each individual commission has adopted different rules of parliamentary procedure or not. But if you have, then those rules are relating to things like how motions can be brought in a meeting and how things are adopted and passed and how the meeting is to be run, for example. Usually these things run very smoothly and we don't need to resort to what the parliamentary rules of procedure are telling us. The time that this comes into play really is if there is a dispute about how something is done procedurally at a meeting, and we need to refer back to the rules to determine whether it was done properly. I think in my time as city attorney, I've only really dealt with a couple of parliamentary procedural issues that have arisen over the last 9 years. So it really does not come up that often. The typical meeting process for your commissions, and this may vary from commission to commission, but essentially you take attendance, you review and approve the agenda, you approve minutes, and then move on to your regular business items. At times, there will be public hearings on the agenda. That happens for some commissions more frequently than others. For example, the Planning Commission quite frequently has public hearings. Then usually you will talk about any future agenda items, upcoming meetings, or other business at the end, followed by adjournment. So the chair of each commission plays a special role, and they are responsible for following the agenda and basically keeping the meeting on track. The chair will invite the staff to present reports, if there are any, on matters that are coming before the commission. The chair will call for discussion and ask for motions relating to things if you are going to be taking any votes on matters, and then we'll announce the results of any votes that are taken. The role of the chair also includes being able to ask disruptive persons to leave a meeting. Hopefully you all don't ever have to deal with that situation, but it does happen in rare occasions where meetings can get disruptive for whatever reason. So the chair has that responsibility of running the meeting and keeping the discussion to the items on the agenda and keeping everything on track. I'm going to show you kind of just to add a little levity here, okay? A video in the next slide here about how meetings can somewhat get off track at times. And I think this is very short, so please bear with me. I think the thing I like about this is at the end where the chair of the body attempts to, and does very well, kind of get things back on track.
Can you see the video, Mary?
I can see it.
Okay.
And this is taken from a real meeting, by the way. Are you able to find the link, Kelly? If you click on the slide, I think the link will come up.
Oh, I'm sorry. It was playing for me. That's why I was wondering if it was playing.
Oh, we can see it, but we can't.
Okay,
can
let
see
me
the-
try. Hold on 1 second here. I think I'm only sharing the PowerPoint, so let me share a different screen here. There we go.
Greetings, mortals. I will make this quick. I, Nando the Relentless, conqueror of thousands, immortal warrior, who has twice turned the Euphrates itself red with blood, hereby demand the complete and total supplication of this governing body to my command. Submit and receive.
thank you for your input, Mr. Nandor. But this session
Well, as I mentioned, next.
pursuant to zoning ordinances. But if you would like to return when we have
Yes, I would very much like to return then.
when we have an open session,
Great.
you are entirely welcome to join
Fantastic, great. When would that be?
in about 2 months. But if you access our website, do you have a computer? That will be the perfect time for you to
Great,
see.
fantastic.
I live on Tanglewood, and the bar on the ground floor below mine.
Okay, I don't know if everybody could hear that very well. Thankfully, there were subtitles there, right? So I think the members of that board looked a little shocked there as they listened, but the chair appropriately invited the commenter to come back at the right time to provide his comments and was very gracious. So I just thought that was a good example of an extreme situation where it was handled very well and nothing got out of hand. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the use of social media. So as you all know, the city of Richfield does have a presence on social media, on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, on other platforms. And the primary purpose for the city engaging on social media platforms is really to connect with residents and to share information with the public. And so the commissions may post and update content through your staff liaisons. And that is, and I don't know if Kelly, if you want to add anything to this, feel free. But I think the general process for accessing social media and posting is to go through the staff liaison for that.
Yeah, we have our communications team here at the city. So if there is something that you have a concern with or would like to be posted, feel free to reach out to your liaison and we can connect with our communications team.
Great, thank you. So you might ask yourself, so why is it so restricted as far as, why do we have to go through the staff liaison? Why are there rules about that? Well, there are some things that the city needs to consider when social media is involved. And it involves some of the issues that we've talked about with respect to open meeting law, data practices, because there are risks associated with communicating on social media where you have a quorum or more of the body. And because all of that information that's being shared on social media is government data, like we talked about before, there are rules about what happens to that information. It has to be retained for a certain period of time, and in some cases. And so because the city has to comply with these laws, like the open meeting law and the data practices statute, it needs to be careful about making sure that not only employees, but commissioners and others who use social media are using it appropriately, so that it minimizes the risk of any violations for the city. And part of that too is just monitoring online etiquette, so there aren't any concerns about inappropriate conduct, that kind of thing. We've kind of already touched on this, that the websites is monitored and controlled by city staff, and they are the ones who will be reviewing, and if there is any content that needs to be deleted, that will be done through staff. So those are the reasons why this is important, and why that policy is in place. Some of the other issues pertaining to social media use are how you use your own personal sites and expressing opinions
Me too.
relating to city business. So you have to remember that you, as a commissioner, you do represent the city. And it would be important, anytime you are commenting
Well, they were
on
available to
something
hear us
related to the
before.
city, to make sure that you are avoiding conflicts that might arise, or making sure that when you are posting opinions that you are doing so and making it clear that those are, for example, your own opinions and not your opinions as a City of Richfield commissioner. I think the other good rule of thumb here relating to social media is to try to avoid posting about issues on social media when you know that they are going to be coming to the commission at a public meeting. I think the reason for that is that, number one, just having the transparency with the public, but also that you are using the public meetings as your platform and your venue for having that public discussion. And not everybody in the public has access to social media. Some people don't have computers. Some people don't have the knowledge and the technical ability to access social media. And so that's I think another good reason to save your opinions and your discussion for the commission meeting when all of that information is available to the body and to the public as a whole. So I want to touch briefly on some city code requirements that apply to city commissions. And this is maybe information that you've heard before, but as you know, for most commissions, you do have to be a resident of the city, and you will be serving a three-year term as a commissioner. I think that's pretty much true across the board for most commissions. The code says that individuals may serve no more than 3 consecutive terms on the same commission. The other item that's addressed in city code is that of attendance. Good attendance is required by the code and can be a reason for removing someone from a commission if absences get to be excessive. I don't think that, to my knowledge, I don't think we've ever had to remove somebody from a commission for excessive absences, but regular attendance is required. If for whatever reason, life happens and things do come up. So it doesn't mean that you're going to be expelled if you don't have perfect attendance. It is to be expected that things will come up and you may not be able to make a meeting. You should, if you can, in advance, notify the staff liaison if you know that you won't be able to attend a meeting, and those absences generally will just be considered excused and not a problem if you have issues that prevent you from attending. The code also talks about how bylaws of the commissions can be amended. Generally, with a 2/3 vote, the commission can amend their bylaws. And I believe every commission has its own set of bylaws with different content and different requirements. So that may be somewhat different for each commission, but that's just a general rule. So how can you effectively participate in your commission? Well, this is by no means an exhaustive list. I think that being part of a commission means you're part of a group and you are not acting as an individual. You have your own individual opinions and views on things, but you're part of this because you're acting in a group and as part of a body. So it's important to remember that and to be a good listener, to allow group participation, to not dominate the conversation. Coming into meetings with a positive attitude, like you really want to be there. I think that's always good. Being on time to your meetings and being prepared. I think that agendas and packets are sent out in advance, so it's great if you can read through the information, be prepared for the meeting. And also, if there are things on the agenda that might involve areas of the city where you could visit ahead of time to have more meaningful input into the meeting, that's a great thing to do as well. You certainly can contact your staff liaison ahead of the meeting if you have questions about anything on the agenda. That's perfectly fine to do that, and we're always more than happy to help answer any questions that you might have. And then, as I've already kind of noted, if for whatever reason you can't attend a meeting, just let your staff liaison know ahead of time. And of course, we're always available for questions at any time. I'm in frequent contact with staff on various things all the time. So when questions come up that need my involvement, I can get involved as well. And just want you to know that we're always available, and no question is dumb. So don't feel shy about asking and letting people know if you have concerns about things. This is probably in a lot of cases a new experience for many of you. So it's something that we expect questions to come up, and that's never a problem. So, all right. I think we made it to the end. Yes. Thank you for being here, and your contribution is extremely important to the city. So I'm happy to stay online for a while if there are questions, and or not. It's up to you guys.
I know Mary touched on this a little bit, but we do want to encourage you to reach out to your liaisons. If you have questions, concerns, anything, feel free to reach out to us. We are here to help you guys. We are working, there's been interest in setting up a chair training. So for chairs or presidents of commissions, we are looking into that and hopefully getting that set up sometime soon. So.
Yes, and I will just add one last comment too, that this orientation, we've done this a few times now. We've kind of followed a similar format over the last couple of years at least, but I am also very open to suggestions about what you all would want to hear and topics that you might are interested in learning more about. So I take any and all comments, feedback, constructive criticism, whatever you have. I want to make this helpful and useful to you. And so we can switch it up, and we can add more, delete stuff, whatever you think would be helpful. So that's another thing. Talk to staff, let them know what was helpful in this presentation and what you might like to see done differently. So I'm totally open to that.
And in that vein, I have a quick question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
You talked a little bit about, just it's safer to default to just meeting during your set meeting times publicly, and that makes sense. I do think that there are some times where work sessions can be really valuable, and a lot of times that might be, sort of one-on-one, just a couple of members of a given committee. So with that said, and you don't have to have an answer to the question now at all, but like some guidelines on sort of taking work offline and what's appropriate would be really great.
Okay, sure. And just, I can respond in part that one-on-one conversations between commissioners is not a violation of the open meeting law because that does not involve a majority or more of the body. And so, that's not something you need to be concerned about. I think the concern comes in when you are maybe having a one-on-one conversation and then one of you then talks to another commissioner who then talks to another commissioner. And in the open meeting law world, that's called a serial meeting, where you might be having those discussions where now you eventually have most of the group involved. So that's why I say good rule of thumb, just save it. But those one-on-one kinds of conversations are perfectly fine and will happen from time to time.
Great, thank you.
Mhm. Any other questions? Well, I know it's not a 65-degree, nice sunny spring day out, but there's still part of the evening left.
Mary, I do have a question, but it's a kind of specific question about a legal advice clinic that the Human Rights Commission is going to be making available to the public. And I don't know if
Yes.
I don't know if this is the right forum or time to discuss it, or if you'd like to discuss it some other time.
Well, if it's just specific to that group, we could certainly, if you could contact your staff liaison and get a question to me, I'd be happy to address it.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, I was having trouble unmuting before. Can you hear me, Mary?
Yes.
I just wanted to follow up on Adrian's question, and I think you answered it by what you said, but in the Sustainability Commission, we were talking a little bit about, well, if the rule of open meeting law is related to quorum, would we be allowed to have like work teams or whatever that were only 3 people that could work on things outside of the meetings just in order to get things done, as Santwana said. And it kind of sounds like you're suggesting no, even though that's not quorum. But we just wanted to get really clear guidance on that.
Yeah, it's a really good question. There's and it's a little bit of a gray area in the law, but the open meeting law says that not only the body is subject to the law, but any committees of the body are also subject to the open meeting law. Now, that's what the statute says, but there's also some decisions, court decisions and other decisions that have said, if that committee doesn't really have final authority on anything, those meetings don't really need to be open to the public. And so I think there's an argument that if you had a subcommittee of a commission or a task force that was less than a majority, if you wanted to be super safe and conservative about it, I think, yeah, post that as a meeting. You might not get anybody from the public who would show up anyway, but those kinds of subcommittee groups are probably not subject to the open meeting law, and there probably isn't too much of a risk with that type of approach.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. I think it's more of an issue when it's the city council, because committees of the city council have more authority than subcommittees of a commission. But that's kind of getting into the weeds with with what the courts have said about open meeting law. All right, well, there's nothing else. We can sign
wrap
off.
up.
And
For anybody that's going over to the sustainability meeting after this, Rachel Lindholm is going to have it open. so you guys can hopefully get started sooner rather than 7:30. So
Thank you, Kelly, for mentioning
Yep.
that. I was wondering the same thing. Commissioners,
Thank
if you
you.
could
I'm
start
also going
early,
to
that'd be
switch
great.
over to the other meeting. Thank you. This was very helpful and I appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for coming. Good luck to all of you, and I really hope that you enjoy your work and your contribution.